Hey everybody, this is Dream, and we got a little 10-game slate here. So this slate is a little bit unusual, but for the season, as in there's not as many injuries as there has been. There's not a ton of questionable tags. There's a few. We do have a lot of guys out, but these guys have been out for most of the season, most of the last couple of weeks anyway. For a pretty big slate, this is actually a surprisingly small amount of injuries. Now, the only real problem with this slate is that there's not a ton of really good value, so in order to fit some bigger players in, you're probably going to have to find some cheap options that are not ideal, especially if some of these questionable tags end up being out tags. That could definitely play into this. But right now, it feels like a lot of guys are a little bit overpriced, and there's not a ton of great value on the slate in general. So that is a little bit concerning on both sides. We do have some good options for you if you're just wanting the who's going to win each individual game. So I'll give you those at the end of the video. But let's get into the injury report. So for the injuries today, we have the Kings with Huter is questionable. For the Hawks, Murray, Capella, and Collins are all out. For the Hornets, Smith Jr. is out and Hayward is questionable. For the Magic, Suggs, Carter Jr., Harris, and Okeke are out. For the Celtics, Smart and Horford are questionable. For the Warriors, Curry and Wiggins are out and Green is questionable. For the 76ers, Maxey is out. For the Raptors, OG Anunoby, Achuet, and Porter are all out. For the Knicks, Toppin is out. For the Timberwolves, Gobert, Russell, and is both questionable, and then Towns is out. For the Thunder, Robinson, Earl, and Williams is out. For the Mavs, Kleber is out. For the Nuggets, Porter Jr. is out. And for the Lakers, LeBron and Davis are probable. Now, one thing I did note is that I felt like a lot of the guys that have been getting a benefit from some of those guys being out have priced up a lot late today, so there's not as much value available from that perspective, which can be rather annoying. But I do have a few guys in my core plays currently. We're going to start with LaMelo Ball. Now, he's only played 4 games this year, but the last 2 games, or the last game rather, sorry, he finally got back, and he's been able to do in the 40s, and he definitely has upside at this price point. He's a little bit too cheap for his potential in this game against Atlanta, who's going to have a lot of guys out as well. This should be a decent scoring game, and the Hornets should be able to take advantage of all the Atlanta's shortcomings. So I expect him to play well and play a lot and get a good amount of minutes and scoring and stuff like that. Then we're going to look at Bogdanovich for the Hawks. Now, he's been playing really solid lately. His price has popped up, but he is viable on the slate at this price point just because of how he's been playing, especially with all the injuries to the Hawks, and assuming that he's going to get a core complement of minutes. And then also Onika Okongwu. Sorry for butchering your name. But his price point's a little bit too cheap for what he's been doing. It's not a it's borderline must play, but he's on the edge and he has got double potential in this game. He should get plenty of minutes with both Collins and Capella out. So I expect him to really step in and get a bigger complement of minutes here. So those are my core plays today. But I got some other guys to talk about as well. We're gonna look at Trae Young. Now Trae Young is a little bit risky because he's Trae Young and he hasn't been consistent lately. As in getting over 50 fantasy points. But he does have that upside, especially with all the injuries to the team, and this is a nice plus matchup for him. I still think he's a secondary play on the slate, but he's still viable simply because of all the injuries and stuff like that. Jalen Brunson is very interesting today against Chicago. Now, it is a little bit of a tough matchup, but he did great in the last game. He's been a little bit up and down lately, but his price is a little down, so I do think he's viable on the slate. And assuming he can play kind of like he did last time, he should get plenty of opportunity to score and score a lot, and it should be a decently high-scoring game. Both teams are pretty good. Jamal Murray is also interesting today for Denver against the Lakers. He's just been pretty consistent, with the exception of 2 games. The last few games, he's been hitting in the mid-40s in some of these games, and hopefully in this game he can do that. I think he's got some nice upside on this one, though he just needs to get scoring in order to do that. The last game, he really didn't shoot the ball that much because I think Washington kind of just factored in on him and tried to let everybody else beat him. But I don't think that the Lakers will really play that way, so I expect him to have a solid game in this matchup. And then Shea Alexander, his price point has been fluctuating above 10,000, but it's just dropped below now. And I definitely like him more when he drops below that, just because of he's been pretty decent and consistent, but it's hard to roster him above 10,000 sometimes. So with this for a little bit of a reduced rate and this nice plus matchup against Minnesota, I think he's got a lot of opportunity to have a big game here. He's been playing really well most of the season, and he gets plenty of opportunity. He gets peripheral stats for the most part. He had a couple games where he didn't, but he still got points. So it's just a matter of, the right situations, and this is definitely a good one. Then we're going to look at Lou Dort here for the Oklahoma City Thunder as well. He's just been playing pretty solid lately. He's had a couple off games. His floor is really low, but his ceiling is pretty high, and he's been playing well, and his price points come down. So I think he's viable on the slate. He's one of the few guys that I felt like were a little bit underpriced. Then we'll look at Pat Williams for Chicago. Now he's pretty limited, low price, and he's not somebody that you expect to like 10x for you. But getting the 20 to 25 range is pretty good, and he can save you a lot of money, and typically doesn't hurt you too much. He's been playing solid, and he gets plenty of minutes as well, especially in good matchups. Then we'll look at DeMar DeRozan, who's been a little bit inconsistent when it comes to getting big games, but and he's had a couple sub 35 games, but for the most part, he plays really well, and he gets a lot of minutes. And these are nice. This is a nice plus matchup, and he's really just, probably too cheap for what he has the potential to do. And then he really doesn't hurt you too much too often. Not only that, but he's been shooting a crap ton of free throws this season. As you can see, he's got 2 games in a row where he's had 15 plus free throws. So if he can continue that and get these minutes, then I expect him to continue this onslaught of scoring that he's done. And his price point is pretty solid from that perspective. Then we'll look at Julius Randle here for the Knicks. He's also a guy, he's been playing pretty well lately. He's had a couple off games. He had a little stretch of, I think, 2 or 3 games, but he's been playing pretty good, and he has gigantic upside because he can score points and get big amounts of rebounds occasionally as well. And this is a nice plus matchup where he's going to have a lot of opportunity and should play quite a few minutes. So I do think he's in a good spot here. Then we'll look at center, and we're going to also take a look at Thaddeus Young for Toronto. He's just too cheap, assuming he ends up starting. He started the last game, kind of surprisingly, and so I didn't think he was viable in that one. He only scored 13 fantasy points, but he does have upside. He actually started a bunch of games a few weeks ago, earlier in the season, rather, and when he did that, he played really well and had a lot of 25, 30, and 30 fantasy point games, and even a couple bigger ones. And obviously his price points popped up. So if he ends up set to start, keep an eye out because there's some injuries to the Toronto, and he should get some opportunity in this game. So that's what I have for DraftKings. Let's go ahead and take a look at FanDuel here. Now on FanDuel, I have LaMelo Ball and Bogdan Bogdanovic as well. But I don't have Akanaglu is a must start because of his price. So let's go and look at LaMelo Ball here. He's been playing only 4 games so far this season, but in the last 2 games he has played, he's gotten close to 40 fantasy points on FanDuel, and I look for him to continue that here on this slate. Not as ideal as some as his prices on DraftKings at way the scoring does, but he's still viable quite a bit, and there's not really too many guys that are. And then Bogdan Bogdanovic, he's been playing really solid since he came back from injury. Now, he is going to get a full complement of minutes in this game. His price has popped up, but I still think he's viable on this one, and he's relatively decent. He's usually a pretty consistent player once he gets going, and I feel like that he should have a pretty good game in this plus matchup against Charlotte. For other players we're going to look at is Trae Young. Now, Trae Young's been playing pretty well, but inconsistent and not really hitting the price point that we want. Because of some team turmoil and stuff like that. So, but with all the injuries here, he's going to be viable on the slate, and this is a nice plus matchup for him. So it's just a matter of him getting in there and just playing the way he likes to play. Then Jamal Murray, his price is a little bit too cheap here on FanDuel for what I like with his upside. Now he's had a couple off games, but overall, for $7,200 is a little bit too cheap for him. He's one of the nicer value plays on the slate in general. Then we'll look at Zach LaVine here for the Bulls. He's at $7,300, and he has some nice upside at this price point. He's not had too many games below 5xing on FanDuel at this price, and I look for that to continue here in this nice matchup for himself. Then we'll look at Shai Alexander. Now Shai's been playing extremely well. and he's even though his price point is right over 10,000, he has upside in this matchup. It's a plus matchup. He's not super ideal because of the price, but he's still a decent play and somebody to consider on the slate. Lou Dort is also a guy I like here. He's a little bit cheap compared to what I kind of expected him to be. He definitely has some nice upside on this matchup, but we do want him to get back into the full complement of minutes as he's missed a couple games the last 10. Then we'll look at DeMar DeRozan, who has been playing really well lately. I expect him to continue to play well and get a full complement of minutes, and his price is pretty solid for what he can do here. He obviously has 60 fantasy point upside, especially in good matchups like this one. Then we'll look at Christian Wood. Now, Christian Wood has been inconsistent, especially because he comes off the bench, so his minutes tend to be all over the place. But he does have a decent matchup here. He's not super ideal. He has been, like I said, inconsistent, but he does have some upside, and so I do think he's viable on the slate. Somebody to take a look at. Then we'll look at DeAndre Hunter for Atlanta as well. Hunter has been playing pretty decent since he's come back from injury. Before that, he was actually pretty consistent in the mid-20s. Now, his price point isn't super ideal here, but he has upside in this matchup, and so that's why he's viable here today. Then we'll look at Okongwu, sorry for butchering your name, for Atlanta. He's been playing pretty solid with the injuries to the team, and now that he's really the main big, he's going to get more and more minutes, and he does get some peripheral stats, which gives him some bonuses when it comes to like blocks and steals, and so I do like that as well. His price point makes him not super ideal here on FanDuel, but he is viable on the slate regardless because he should get a full complement of minutes. I'm also going to take a look at Domantas Sabonis here for the Kings. He's been playing really solid lately. He's had some inconsistencies this season, and he's had some rough games, but overall, he's got a nice matchup here, and I look for him to play well in this particular game. And then Julius Randle, finally, last but not least. He's been playing extremely well in some of these games, and then he'll have a couple games where he doesn't play as great, but he's still getting the mid-30s most of the games. His price point is pretty fair for what he does, and he obviously has big-time upside in certain particular matchups, and this is definitely one of them. So with that said, guys, let me get into my team picks. So I have the Kings over the Pistons, the Hornets over the Hawks, the Celtics over the Magic, the Cavs over the Pacers, the 76ers over the Warriors, the Nets over the Raptors, the Thunder over the T-Wolves, the Mavs over the Trailblazers, and then the Nuggets over the Lakers. So if you guys have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. Thank you again for liking, commenting, subscribing, and have a nice day, guys.